Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Poole, and I'm with the Pasadena Literary Alliance, and we are a year-round program in Pasadena. So if anybody's interested in volunteering, we're an all-volunteer group, and we had the amazing fortune this spring of putting together this panel, which, by the way, means that we read all the books, and all the books of the people who aren't here, and we picked these guys. So it's so exciting to see it come together. I just want to say a couple things. One is that we were partners, of course, with LitFest Pasadena, so that was new for us, and this is the result of that partnership, so I love that. The other thing I want to say is that on your chairs, most of your chairs, there are flyers for the 3 next events from our organization that are coming up. And one of them is next weekend, where we assemble 600 women at the Pasadena Convention Center to focus on fiction. So that's available. Their tickets are available for that. If anybody is interested, make sure you get a flyer. There's also a flyer for a memoir conversation that's on our website that is from a fella who wasn't able to be on our panel. So supplemental reading is on your chair if you look in the flyers. Okay, so it's my honor to introduce our panel moderator, Jeff Hobbs. And Jeff is the author of 2 nonfiction books, which I brought because he probably won't sing his own song. So they are for sale. One of them is The Short and Tragic Life of Robert Peace, which is a fantastic nonfiction biography of an incredible person who was your roommate, your college roommate. And then another one about kids in Los Angeles, Show Them You're Good, which is about 4 to 6 kids in LA high schools that you followed through a year to understand what their challenges were in the LA schools. Obviously, I could say a lot more. And now, Jeff has a forthcoming book entitled Children of the State: Survival and Hope in the Juvenile Justice System. So we're looking forward to that, Jeff. Jeff is the winner of the LA Times Book Prize and runner-up for the Carnegie Medal. Jeff lives here in Los Angeles, and I'm happy to turn the panel over to you and the microphone.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Katie, and thank you to all of you. I'm really moved to be here with these 3 wonderful authors. Author is just one hat that each of you wear, and I'm just excited. So thanks for including me here. I was originally going to end this conversation with sort of a lightning round, where I was going to ask each of you about sort of a word or phrase that was prominent in your books, but I thought we might start with that lightning round and kick it off that way before I ask you to start cracking your chests open about the themes of our panel here. So I would like to start with Silvia. These are just phrases that jumped out at me as having multiple meanings and just undercurrents throughout the work. And for Silvia, I wanted to ask about the catastrophe of the Western ego.
I forgot to say, we possibly need the Kleenex if we're doing this kind of panel. But the catastrophe of the Western ego is the idea of conquering as a strength. That's what I would call it. That's a lightning round.
And Obed, I wanted to ask you, there's a very moving passage about 2/3 of the way through your book where the term keeps coming up from el otro lado, the other side, and I wanted to, free association, what that means to you.
I just want to say that every passage is moving in the book. El otro lado, I mean, it means exactly what you said, the other side. But in a lot of border states in Mexico, that's how people refer to the United States. They just say, he's in el otro lado, or he went to el otro lado, or she went to el otro lado. And my father used that term a lot because he had a habit of comparing the United States to Mexico, and he saw that everyone in the United States was privileged. Therefore, he saw me as privileged, even though, you know, I grew up with a single parent, low income, and things of that nature. So that's what he meant. Every time he said el otro lado, he said it in a condescending way, but it simply means the other side, right?
Thank you. And Antong, I'm worried that this might sound trite, but I'm asking you about this word because it is it's used a lot, and I'm not sure everybody, it's used so much that I think people think about it less, and it is certainly runs throughout your book. The word is empathy.
Okay, first, Jeff, I didn't know. Jeff is so unassuming. I did not know you was a literary giant. I didn't know that. We got to give him a hand. I have to get your books. But empathy, when you look at the definition of the dictionary, it says being able to share the feelings of another. But I think for me, empathy meaning ceasing how your perception box, or how you see, to be able to see from the vantage point of another person. I think that's empathy. When I coined it in my book, is being able to kill the way you see and putting yourself in the shoes of someone else and see the way they see. So you're removing those judgments that you have, even when you're thinking about empathy, and really seeing it from that person's perspective. That's empathy for me.
Thank you. Thank you all again. And now for the fun stuff. So by way of a more formal introduction, I wanted to ask, each of these memoirs begins with trauma, real trauma. They're structured around trauma, what many people would call indescribable trauma. And yet you have each gone ahead and described it in your books. And writing about these experiences, just writing in any form, is kind of strange. It's intense. It's at the same time removed and claustrophobic. It's also a really prolonged, sustained exercise. And so my first question is, why did each of you decide to do this to yourselves and write these books about your lives? Why don't we start at the end of the table?
I don't think we had a choice. Well, at least I don't believe that I had a choice. I think it just, I started writing the book on an airplane on my way to my father's funeral, which was the following day of his death. And so I always carry a journal with me, and I was on the airplane, and I cracked open this brand new journal that had been gifted to me. And so the opening lines in this book are the lines that I wrote down, the first lines that I wrote down in that airplane. And I just kept with it. And I shared the first few pages with a professor of mine, and she told me to make it into a book. You know, it's a powerful story here. And so I did. And that's
would you be willing to read like the first sentence
the first
of the book so we can be in
the
the
first
airplane?
moving sentence in the book? Let me see. Yeah, and it simply says, you know, I dated it as well, July 13th, 2009. I'm asleep when the phone rings. I can hear it, but I can't make out whether I'm dreaming or if it's really ringing, right? And the phone call is from my little brother, who is calling me early in the morning to tell me that our father had passed away.
Yeah, thank you. For me, the process, or at least the idea, came on my anniversary of Everest. I had gotten into a bike accident, and I didn't have a helmet, and I ended up on the ICU. And while I was in the ICU, the doctors found a small brain tumor that they couldn't tell if it was cancerous or benign. And so I had my friends who had come to keep me company, to make me laugh. And the doctor told me I was going to have to wait a couple of days to determine if it was, good or bad. So I remember kicking everybody out and having a time for myself and giving myself gratitude. And as you will see with the book and my journey, I'm a sucker for promises. And I have a hard time. The minute I make a promise, it's almost like, boom, that becomes my focus or my purpose. And I told myself, okay, well, if it's cancerous and given that cancer is in my family, I will quit my job tomorrow. I'm going to spend the rest of what I have left in my life to climb as much as I can, work with as many young women as I can, and try to find a way of sharing my story. Because I felt that at that point, knowing that I had a limited time, that maybe I just needed to get it out of my head and put something. And so that was the impetus. And luckily, the tumor has been benign, but the seed was there, the promise was there. And I think that maybe was the wake-up call, because else I possibly would have carried on with life still waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for, maybe I have to wait until I achieve this to start sharing the story. But that was the jolt that really put me, okay, I'm gonna have to share this. So that was my very beginning.
And I think for me, I remember standing in the courtroom, expecting to go home 2 weeks prior. My daughter was born May 7th, it was May 21st, and a judge said to me, "You're a menace to society." And I remember having a conversation in my head saying, "But Judge, you don't understand, I live in South Dallas, and you gotta be tough to survive, but that's not really me." And I remember having that conversation, but it never came out of my mouth. And so from that point, when that happened, I became very introspective that day. I began to trace every idea, every choice I made, because prior to that, I was an A honor roll student. I was a talented and gifted student, very smart, loved education, but I was swallowed up by a neighborhood and environment that said survival, that you had to survive. And so as I began to retract all of my steps, I could pinpoint where our ideas in my community, in my environment, shifted me. But I was never that individual. I was only doing what I felt at the time necessary to survive, because I was a kid who encountered a stimuli in my environment that made me amputate my personality and become someone else. And so when I started looking at that, I went into prison saying, I have to figure this out. I didn't blame nobody. I went in prison with the assignment to figure out who I was, what was my perception box. And I stared in the mirror, that little stainless steel mirror, and I had to accept everything I had become. And so as I began to pull those layers back, it made me very, very vulnerable, which most men don't do, especially in that environment. I denounced a gang that I started in prison. That's something you just don't do. But as I started to do that and I started to teach and learn, I became an autodidact. I've read probably over 1,000 books while I was in prison. I began to teach other men. And what I found was that my story was my medicine, but my medicine was just not for me. It was for someone else. And so that prompted me to write about it, because as I was retracing my life, I was seeing where God had his hand on me. I seen where God was shaping me in that experience. And so it was my duty to say, how do I share this with someone else, or some young person that's in that same seat that I was in, who were looking for someone to take him out of this landmine called this neighborhood. And I wanted my book to be that blueprint, that roadmap.
Thank you. And so I promise this is the last time I will use the word trauma. But the title of the panel is Resilience, and those two notions are very closely related, and so trauma leads to resilience. Sometimes one hopes. But it can also lead in a lot of other directions. It can lead to healing and romance and more tragedy, vulnerability, sometimes even comedy. And I would say all of these stories go to all of these places. And I wanted to ask, in your own opinion, what is the strangest place that that your stories led during the journey? The strangest. We can start with Obed again.
It's not it's not the strangest, but it's the most devastating. I hadn't finished the book when I shared it with my writing mentor, who's Hector Tobar, who's also a writer. And, you know, I'd been writing the book for about 9 years. And he said, listen, take a year and finish the ending, and I'll send it to my publisher. And I learned the ending, which I will not reveal, but it's the most devastating part of the book, while writing the book. And I don't know, had I never started writing this book, if I ever would have learned that had happened to a very important person in my life. And so it's not the strangest, but it's the most devastating place that writing the book took me. So it's the ending.
Thank you, but I feel for me, maybe the strangest and the hardest part was I had gotten, I told myself when I decided to start writing the book, I needed to do it sober. I needed to, for once and for all, you know, face this demon that had been in my life for 20 plus years. And I had just started that sober road. I was, I think, about a year sober when I started writing it. And I had to relive and reopen these boxes that I have never done in my life, and to get into the level of detail. And I think that the strangest and the saddest thing for me was to unveil the amount of self-harm that I had done to myself. Just a little love that I had. That was really, really hard. And I had to, you know, write it and rewrite it and rewrite it, and I couldn't numb myself. I had to stay strong through it. Then we're in the middle of a pandemic, so it wasn't that I couldn't share with a lot of people. You know, I was alone in my home. And so reliving a lot of it possibly was the hardest thing for me. But I also knew, and from the very moment, I think I was very lucky that this seed started as a way for me to hopefully share it with people who maybe were struggling just the way I had, and to know that they were not alone. And so that kept me going. But maybe I guess that was that opportunity of just almost having an appreciation. I learned how to give myself a lot of self-compassion, and a lot of times when bringing out so many hard scenes, I would have to stop, start meditating, start crying, and also, you know, be my own, I guess, protector. And I thought that was really powerful to come.
And I can say that I experienced that exact same feeling. I think for me, strangest, awkward, but necessary and therapeutic for me, because as I began to write, you know, I came to a point where I had analysis paralysis. I was paralyzed. I couldn't write, because I realized that when you're doing a memoir, the stories that you tell, the people that's involved may see that situation totally different than what you're writing. And these are people that are close to you, they're friends, they're family members. And so you go through this stage where you questioning, you erasing, and you saying, should I share this? And then all that. And so, but for me, it was therapeutic, because I neglected to mention that my father at 9 months was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He ultimately did 37 years in prison. And my mother, a single parent living in the projects, you know, she worked And she closed that chapter. When he left, or when he was sentenced, she closed that chapter. And nobody explained to me, the little boy, the little kid that I was, that wanted to know about his father. No one took the time out because that chapter was closed. And so as I began to write about this stuff, and sharing with my mother, because my mother, she was not an expressive person. You know, she a doer, she don't express, you know, and that has to do with the way she was raised. But as I started to write this book and I started to do interviews about my book, it brought me and my mother to this intersection, because she had never thought about how I felt as a child. She never thought about that. And it put us in this odd place. But I can say, since she's seen some interviews, seen some stuff that I had written, you know, she tell me she loved me every day. She when I got on the plane, I just called to tell you I love you. But it really helped our relationship, because I think what she took from it was that I didn't feel love, I didn't get the love, and she kind of felt guilty about it. And so now, like, if I'm sick, she gonna care package me everything. And I'm like, Mom, I'm a grown man, but she gonna come over, she gonna be a doctor, all that good stuff. But I think it has to do with this book and this process, you know, her really understanding how I felt as a kid.
Thanks. Another lightning round, just short answers, and we'll start down here. What was the, and I know what I think having read the books, but what is the funniest moment that you've described?
The funniest moment is when I was released from prison. It wasn't funny, but it was funny. I was released from prison, and I get out with this excitement about going back into my neighborhood and helping the young people not make the decisions I make and changing their trajectory, et cetera, et cetera. And I met this pastor. His name was Obed. He passed away, rest his soul, last year. But he's one of the most powerful person I ever met, most impactful, he embodied, you know. And so when I met him, he told me, he said, let's go to your rivals and ask them for peace. And I remember looking at him saying, that's suicide. We can't do that. And he convinced me to go into my rival's neighborhood unarmed. And I remember knocking on the door, and I'm a Pastor Mike, and the guys seen me, and all you heard was shuffling and feet shuffling, guns cocking, and they snatched the door open, and they all got guns drawn on me. And I just met Omar, and he was a pastor, and he said, put your hands up. And I remember putting my hands up, and Scott said, God, I know you're not finna kill me right now. I came too far. I done gave up the game. And Omar started talking, and them guys started lowering their guns. And I remember saying, God, just keep talking, just keep them talking. And they ended up allowing us the opportunity to work with the young people in their neighborhood, and we did the first gang peace treaty in Dallas ever. You know, 200 young people signed a pledge not to gangbang. So that was funny, and it was scary.
Yeah, that was definitely funny. For me, I had the most fun writing when I arrived to America. As an immigrant, it's like my coming to America. I had visited the U.S. once, San Francisco. My half siblings were living there. A couple years later, I'm coming to college, first time, arriving straight from Peru. 2 suitcases, winter clothes in August, Pennsylvania, and English is a second language, and I have no idea that my university is in the heart of the Amish country. But I am going to America, and so I'm walking all of Philadelphia telling myself, hello, I am Silvia from Peru. And I remember just, and reliving it and writing, it was so much fun, just that innocent. I'm here, you know, with my 2 massive suitcases full of alpaca clothing, just completely excited. I'm going, the idea of the U.S., haven't seen 90210, that show, was that everything in America would be like that. And I remember just, you know, and so it was so much fun to relive how from Philadelphia, nobody from the university was there. I had to take the Amtrak, and I'm still excited, wide-eyed, being like, oh my God, it's a big city, and it's amazing, Philadelphia, and Lancaster is close, only 5 stops. And then you start seeing from the train ride as the the buildings start getting smaller, 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 towards plain fields. I see a buggy, and I'm like, oh, Lancaster. So I thought it was really fun it was just so special to all of a sudden having this culture shock, but also the innocence and the excitement of starting in a new place. But that was really special for me to be able to relive it, and even that whole episode that chapter is one of my favorite ones, because it's not just that life in the university is. I have the chance to connect with my uncle in New York, who gets me a fake ID on my 18th birthday, and I get a chance to also live and appreciate immigrant life, because I'm in some part of New York with the massive immigrant community and connected to my heritage. So that is one of my favorite chapters. It's just so light, and it was a lot of fun to get into.
When I arrived in Chihuahua, I was already buzzed. I had a few drinks of whiskey on the plane, and then I had more drinks of whiskey at the airport as I waited for my uncle to come and pick me up. So when I arrived at the funeral parlor, I was feeling good, man, let me tell you. I was feeling fantastic. I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm going to my dad's funeral, and I feel great. And I didn't want to go inside of the parlor because the book is a lot about the tumultuous relationship that my father and I had at the last years of his life, to the point where we planned the violence against one another. So I didn't care to see him much, but the family encouraged me, and so I go in, and the casket in Mexico, they put plexiglass over the body. And I didn't know it then, but it's for the stench, because they don't embalm you the way they do here. They kind of like bury you like hours after you die. Unfortunately, my father hadn't been buried because they had, they were waiting for me to arrive and see him. And so I see the plexiglass, and I'm like, what the fuck is this, man? So I took it off, and on taking it off, it was glued. I cut my thumb, and so I started bleeding. And I look over my shoulders, and there was nobody in the parlor but me. So I look over my shoulders to see if anybody's watching, and I clean the blood on his shirt. And I say, and those lines are in the book, you say, fuck it, where you're going, this shit ain't going to matter no more. So I clean myself on his shirt. And in addition, when I started grieving, because my father had a tattoo of my mother's name and my name on his chest, and I wanted to see if it was still there. So I unbuttoned his shirt, and I started letting the blood drip onto his chest. And I'm a painter, I'm an artist, so I just started fucking dabbing them and blending them together, kind of like a piece of artwork, and I spelled out my name on there, Obed. And, and I said, I think something along the lines like, this is your blood, take it with you. Tomorrow I'll bury you, and it's been said, right? So that was like, I guess, a morbid, funny fucking story. My dad would have loved it, though. He would have loved it.
Macabre, maybe. Thank you for that. I enjoyed that, and that's sort of a nice lead-in. I wanted to ask Obed and Silvia, you both write hauntingly, and I would say evocatively, about being raised in alcoholic homes, and later leading alcoholic lives. And in a different way, you both write very powerfully about food and drink, go together very well. But food, it helps us through, and it helps us slow down. And writing too is an act of slowing down. And I was wondering, that just got me thinking. I was wondering how you did slow down to tell your stories and just get through the passage in life that you write about. What sort of helps you? What carries you through?
What carries me? Well, I want to say, first of all, I want to congratulate you on your sobriety. And I've been sober for 4 months, so yay. I've been an alcoholic and drug addict for about 25 years of my life, and my dad died of cirrhosis of the liver at 48. I'm 43 now, so I wanted not to continue that cycle. So I stopped drinking 4 months ago. Now the question was about what keeps us going.
Yeah, and just slows it down so you can.
Well, I don't know if my life ever slows down. I mean, what slows me down is, like I said, I'm a painter, so when I'm painting and I'm in front of a canvas, it's like everything stops. It's just me and what's before me. And it's the same thing when I write. It's just me and, either the computer or a journal before me, and everything else stops. And it's like my therapy in a way. I just escape. So that's for me.
That's a good one.
Thank you, Obed, and congratulations, 4 months. I mean, it goes. Yeah, I'm about to hit 4 years, so it's been one day at a time. Biggest gift ever to give to yourself. What slows me down, and I'm laughing, I have one of my dearest friends who possibly would say nothing ever slows me down. I would say, I think, I had to, whenever I'm going into expeditions, it's almost like moving and on a fast pace, but I would say, because for me, to keep my sobriety, I don't go to meetings, but I do this compassion cultivation training meditation. And that allows me to reset myself. So that really takes the edge off, or just allows me to refocus. And especially when writing, I think the way that I looked at every chapter, and I was very lucky that I had a lot of support and there were a lot of deadlines. So I was working against a deadline in my particular case. So I would look at it as mountains, and I would have to just, work on myself, make the space, and then I think I was very lucky that I would have every chapter. I would break it down about anecdotes or certain stories. So getting into the heart of it, and I would just write nonstop everything that would come out and try to keep asking. I'm very lucky. I did pretty much most of my therapy sessions. I was lucky I would have 90-minute sessions, and the first 5 minutes would be to cover day-to-day stuff that would bug me, and the rest of the time will be able to completely get into the depth of emotions. And just, I think the fact that I was reliving the trauma and looking at it, it forced me to create the space. So I would say definitely my meditation was what would force me, take the edge off, because I think with trauma, at times it's a survival and you are on a constant run, and it's safety at times. But for me, having been working through all this compassion work, self-compassion more than anything, it forces you to just take a little bit of a break and reset yourself, so that you don't get assaulted.
Thank you for sharing those. Antong, I wanted to say, so Silvia and Obed, your books are very interestingly structured around an event, your father's funeral and Everest. And Antong, your book is much more linear. It's sort of a chronological journey through time, and it struck me the way you write and the way you as a storyteller. When you're reading something, you're looking for cause and effect often, and you're looking for lessons and sort of ways to tie things together. But when you're living life, often you're just reacting, and you're not, necessarily finding lessons. And I guess I wanted to ask, sitting here looking back, what is the lesson, if there is a lesson?
I think when I was writing, I wanted to, write in a way that was easy, that it's chronologically telling a story, but what's hidden in the story is the example. is the example. So you're looking for the story while you're actually experiencing the story and the examples. So I wrote it like that, and so that if you're an academician or maybe someone who don't read books, I found the bridge to where it's not an urban novel. It's not that. I didn't write it like that, how most books I've read. I wrote it to where it could be a work of art. You know, you can really see my story without me having to tell you my story. You walking with me, and you seeing the choices that I've made from this point to that point. And that's what I wanted it to be, because at the end, when you're looking at from where I came to where I ended up, you gotta say, wow, you know, where I'm at in terms of life. You have to say, wow, after you read the book. You have to say, this kid went through all of this, and now he's at the top of his game. So it's not a quick, get rich scheme. It's not that. It's about life and dealing with life as it comes and as it unfolds. And so you get to walk through that experience with me to see where I end.
Thank you. And just a couple more questions, and I assume some of you might have questions. I wanted to ask more of like a craftsmanship question, in the sense that in Memoir, just as a reader of memoirs, it gets really magical when there is a real melting together of the storyteller and the character in the center of it, and you all have achieved this. And I wanted to ask, particularly, you describe your childhoods, and if during the times you were looking back, on your childhoods, I'm not calling anybody old, but some time ago, if there was any sort of craftsmanship strategy you used, or craftsman strategy that you learned when you were describing the sensations and the words from growing up. Want to start with Obed again?
I feel for me, and I mentioned a couple of times, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk was a book that opened my eyes into the amount of information and trauma that we have stored in our bodies. And that was so pivotal, because once you are able to make the right space and be in the right state of mind, we are just this walking wealth of information, of sensations. I mean, we might think we might not remember things, but if we give ourselves the space, if we open up, it's amazing when it comes out, the details and the feelings and the emotions. And so for me, in terms of the experiences with childhood, in my own journey, I really hadn't gone into that depth until I started writing the book. I always stay through the surface, but just like I felt I needed to, kind of put myself there, especially in a meditative space, creating the right supportive environment in my own place, to just start picking out. And it was amazing how much kept coming out. I remember emotions, sensations, and memories. And so I found it really powerful how much we have it in us, and you can reactivate it easily. I think we tend to walk with the idea that we might not want to bring it out because of maybe what's going to come out, and it might not be pretty. It might not be have the expectation or just a set goal. If you think something is going to come out or answer a question, it might be maybe more confusing. But if you do away with any expectation, something will come out and you'll be able to relive it. And so that's something that opened up for me.
Do you find that cathartic or yeah?
Amazingly cathartic. It was almost the opportunity of closing the loop, of bringing a lot of explanations. So, yep.
For me, there's three things. The first is I didn't want my book to be in chronological order. I'm a fan of memoir, and I read lots of memoir, and most of them are in chronological order. So my book, the thread that keeps it together, it happens within 3 days. It's broken up in 3 parts: the wake, the funeral, and the beginning. That's the title of each of those sections. And the thread that keeps it together is the wake, the funeral, and then the ending. But everything else is flashback. It's about memories of my father, whether they were good or they were bad. The other thing is, while I was writing the book, and I think by that time I was already working on the ending, I was listening to NPR, and they had this woman on there who was an expert on memoirs. And she was giving advice, and she said, yeah, in order for it to be a successful memoir, it has to have a redemptive ending. And I was like, well, fuck, there goes my book, shit, right? Because there's nothing redemptive about this book. There's no redemption there. My second book, In the Hands of My Mother, that's the redemption story, but not this book itself. So, well, but again, I shared it with my mentor, Hector Torre. He goes, no, don't listen to that. You just write your book, write your story, and tell it the way that you're going to tell it. So there's those two things. And the third thing is I'm in constant discussion with literary giants that I admire, like Victor Hugo, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, Tolstoy, all the fucking great Russians. So I got to put it out there, right? So you'll find allusions to those writers in my book, all over my book. So I think that's what sets me aside from other memoirists or memoirs, because I'd never seen it done. And at first I was just writing, but once I had a good chunk of material, I became really cognizant of how I wanted to structure it. And so the end result is this. Thank you.
And I think for me, mine is totally the contrary. I wrote my book with redemption in mind, and I wanted it to be like that because I wanted to challenge normal stereotypes. I wanted to give people insight in terms of how kids in the urban communities, you say, why did this kid end up like this? I wanted to take people through that process and then take them out, And there was a lot of books that affected the way I wrote this book. I remember Author Viktor Frankl saying, if you found your how, you can find the why. You find your why, you can find the how. And so, and using that, as I was in prison, that was one of my favorite authors too, FYI. But I began with redemption in mind because I want to show that redemption is possible. I even coined this term called redemptive activism, which says that a person, place, or a thing is not solely defined by an action of a past, and that we all have the inalienable right to modify, adjust, or correct. And I think that's what's absent in the conversations today on a national level. Our conversations are so condemnatory. We so dug into our positions that we are not able to listen to someone else. We can't hear. And so as a result, our country is divided because we have this condemnatory way of how we look at stuff. And so I wanted my book to be, I wanted to take you through the ugly and then take you all the way to the good, that redemption is possible, transformation is possible, because being redeemed is not about being right. Redeemed is about being righteous, and that's a difference. We spend too much time trying to be right as opposed to being righteous. And so when you take a kid like me who ran from police, who had a very adversarial relationship with police coming up, and now I'm training police officers, going around the country with the police chief, bridging the gap between police and community, that's redemption. That's redemption, and that's what I wanted this book to represent. I wanted this book to represent that we can be redeemed, that you can be redeemed, that it don't have to be an indictment. We can't move forward because we're too indictful of each other. And so my book is going to give you a blueprint on how redemption looks and how you embody redemption, not just in this story, but as a nation.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to turn it over to you guys. I just wanted to ask one more very, very quick question that I'm personally interested in, which is that you three people we have here, you are educators and speakers and motivators and philanthropists and just these magisterial humans on the mountaintop, metaphorical and actual sometimes. And you know, you all do this, and now you are authors. And I just wanted to hear quickly, because it's fun to exult in this, what it feels like to have your book, to hold it in your hand and get to be here. How about start at this end?
It's a beautiful feeling.
It's a gift. It's amazing. It's a truly dream come true to be walking and just having people react to it. I literally didn't hold back anything, and it is, you know, there is absolutely no difference between me and anyone, and especially this is my way of extending my hand. In case somebody needs a little, they feel that they're alone, that nobody can compare. But no, it's an amazing gift.
Yeah. I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out in the 9th grade, and I was shot when I was 17, and that's why I'm in a wheelchair. And I shot a rival gang member when I was 18, and I almost lost my life to the prison system. So to be able to be here and say, I'm a fucking writer, yo, I'm an author. It's like, that's what's up. You know? So it feels great, and I just remember that when I got the book, the hard copy, and I got it at my house, and I opened it, I remember just thinking, and hell, I was saying it out loud. I wrote every fucking word in here, man. Like, I wrote that, you know? And it's so gratifying. It's like when I finish a painting that took me a year to create, and it's like you finish it, and you look at it like, yes, it's there, right? And so I see the book, and I'm like, yes, it's there. But more importantly, you know, my students, they get to see that. They get to see me as a professor, but also as a writer, as an author. That's the icing on the cake, because it's like, well, if I did it, I dropped out of high school. You guys went to high school. You could write a book, too. You're way ahead of the game on that. The other part, sadly, is, you know, I was asked a couple months back, so do you feel like an author now? I said, well, I'm still fucking broke, so I don't know. If that's what an author life is like, then yeah, I guess so. Yo, shit. My millions at with my royalties, FSG shit. I didn't self-publish.
And then lastly, let me say this, because that was good. Lastly, for me, writing this book, just like when I read Viktor Frankl's book and some of the many other books as I read their stories, I became less impressed with myself. It was like humbling, you know? And so I think I want my book to be like that. When someone reads that story, then they say, man, it brings that humility in them. Because reading Viktor Frankl's story, when I was whining about being in prison, I said, boy, I don't have no reason to be whining if he went through all of that and he made it. And so that's what I want my book to represent.
Well, thanks. Well, humility is a really tender note to end on here. Thank you all, and we do have time for anybody's questions. If you want to just raise your hand, and I'll call on you.
I should get a mic, though. Yeah. Here you go. Thank you. First of all, thank you for your vulnerability and for being here, and it's just wonderful. And I really, I've read Silvia's book, and I want to read the other two. So I'm here with my pandemic writers group and a friend. And one of the things that, and I was lucky enough to meet Silvia in a UCLA extension class, and it's just so inspiring to us to see somebody walk through it. You're all very, very intelligent, and I would think that it sounds like you have gone back to school and you've studied writing, and So what I want to know is that, I've studied writing and all of that, but I get stuck with the paralysis of analysis. And, oh my God, is this the right arc? What the hell is an arc? Am I doing this the right way? What about the structure? Just getting so I wanted to see if you have some advice for writers to just get onto the page versus, I go to conferences, I read the books, I read, I've just studied because I'm not enough. But what's your writing process and how do you get over that self-critic? I know it's a long.
Yeah, this is the first time I ever heard paralysis of analysis. What is that? All right. I wish I could give you a magic potion that just like, bam, there you go, there's a book, man. But it doesn't work that way. What I tell my students is if you have a story and you feel it's powerful and it needs to be told and people are going to learn from it, write it. Just write it. Don't worry about the arc. Don't worry about, the structure. Don't worry about anything like that just yet. Write the story first. Get it out there with all its ugliness, with all its happiness, with all its joy, with all its fucking tears. Put it out there and tell the truth. Don't sugarcoat it because readers don't like sugar-coated material. Be raw, and just as it happened to you and just as you remember it, write it. And I think to me, that's always been the best advice. Just tell the truth. And, no matter how dark it is and no matter how ugly it is, people out there are going to relate to it and going to be like, damn, I'm not the only one that suffers through something like this. And that's what makes books special.
Yeah, I was going to add, and thank you, but I was just simply going to add, because I know we can be very critical, and especially if we get into the analytical brain, we want to put something perfect. Everybody's going to have an opinion. Not everyone is going to like it, and you can't do anything about it. I remember even the book came out in February. Last August, I was, some people were doing early reading, and I saw a negative, 1 star on Goodreads, and I started getting freaked out, and, oh my God, what's going to be? It's going to be bad. You need to let go of it. As Obed said, is your truth, is what you witness. If it has purpose, if it has meaning, it'll be relatable. And you are not going to be able to fight with anyone on their own experience, but just trust your heart. Trust, that's what I share a lot in the book. I mean, moments about just when you feel at that lowest part, just trust, remember, you yourself have that wisdom. It's up to you to reactivate it or just to be able to get it out. But yeah, once you put it out there, if you put it out with honesty, with the way that you are, that's all you have to worry about.
No, I would echo what you guys said and just write it. Just write it. I mean, once you get over that hump, it's on, because your story is your medicine. I mean, and you can only tell your story the best way you know. I never worried about structure, arc, and all that stuff. I was just writing, I was just delivering my story. And I didn't care about that because I wanted it to be authentic, organic, and be the truth. And, the only hiccup I had was when I started recalling the events that involved other people. And once I got over, it took me about 6 months to get over that because I froze. But once I was over that hump, it was downhill, because it's a level of freedom that come with that when you can tell your story without worrying about what people say. That's what writers do. When you write the story, you're gonna have critics, and that just come with it, but it's your story. Can't no one tell you that your story is not your story, and that's your medicine. Share it with the world.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess this question's for all of you, but maybe specifically for Obed. You said you were a lover of fiction, and I'm wondering how the fiction you've read in the past, your love of fiction, affects the process of writing a memoir, and how you craft characters and storylines. And do you ever have the desire to kind of embellish or make things a little more interesting because you're thinking about fiction authors you've loved in the past? And how does that conflict with the desire to be as honest as possible in your writing?
Yeah, I'm always like, what would Dostoevsky fucking write? What would Chekhov fucking say? No, I never had that. Although, some of the reviewers, especially the New York Times review, guy was a dick. He said that he's an idiot, really. He didn't know what he was talking about. I don't even think he. But he said that some of my digressions were exhausting. I'm like, well, apparently this guy doesn't know Russian literature. What the hell? Like, this guy's never read good literature. Like, what's his problem? You know what I mean? Too many short stories for this kid. But no, I never. I mean, comparison is what the murderer of originality, right? So I never compare myself to other writers or painters, for that matter, while I'm in the act of doing it, right? I'm just writing the story the way I know best how to write it, with my own voice. So no, and the embellishing, I don't even think I do that. I just, however best I can tell the story, however best I'm capable of writing the story, whatever words are in my lexicon, that's what I'm going to use.
To me, some of the stories are an indictment on our society and the failings of our society. And I was wondering if any of you are involved in any activism to try to change some of the things that you went through unfairly to you.
Yeah, for me, I was sexually abused when I was 6 years old, and I have a nonprofit that has been working with young survivors to try to give them the power of healing through experiences in nature. And right now, especially, I have a group of about 18 young women in Peru who were sexually molested in elementary school, and we just finished high school after 5 years, and I'm using education as empowerment. And I am having these big ideas as to how we can revolutionize my own country, which keeps suffering. So for me, if anything, the book has given me this vehicle of putting the story out there and just trying to keep fighting through the stigma, through the shame that survivors, unfortunately, we have to carry. And it's my lifelong mission to just continue. So that is, I've taken this personal. It's not just share the story and move on, but it is trying to use this. And this has been a beautiful key to start entering in new discussions and trying to bring awareness. But that is personally from my end. Yeah, thank you.
I just want to say, I'm not as active as I used to be because I've been jailed for my activism. So I kind of gave that up and said, no, I'm cool with that. I've already been to jail. But I am an activist in the sense that I work with Homeboy Industries through the Homeboy Art Academy. And so my job now, I see it as helping people heal and redeem themselves who have been affected by social structures in our justice system. So that's where I see my role, and inside of the classroom as well, by teaching social justice books of all genres. Yeah.
As far as me, we have a movement, we have an organization called Heal America. And it's kind of the high level, my activist work, and it's really challenging racial injustice with weapons that we know can win: love, justice, courage, and redemption. So employing that redemptive activism I just spoke about, that's part of my work. We do that around the country. We bring people together who normally wouldn't be in a room together. We started doing that way before it became popular to do, so we were the first ones to do that. I want to say that. I was last week I was in a maximum security dealing with inmates who minimum been in prison 10 years, most of them 20, 30 years. They've been in prison, G4 inmates who are about to get out, who took this life class. And I was a speaker, and I do that. I go to prisons a lot because my charges to those in prison is you have a responsibility. You have to be accountable. You have to be decent citizens. You have kids in these streets, et cetera, et cetera. And what was most fascinating for me was a guy came up to me, a white guy came up to me who had been in prison 27 years, and he said to me, this was last week, he said, this was the first time that I felt human in 25 years, that I needed to see this, I needed to witness this, the love that you guys gave us, et cetera, et cetera. So I do that work, and it's a whole bunch. I'll be here all day trying to tell you everything I do, but I definitely am in the space trying to make our world a better place. That's my POV. I want to make our world a better place. I want to get rid of hate. I want us to work together. I want this to be the best country because it is the best country, and we need to know that, and we need to work together. That's my work on a larger scale, just trying to bring us together as a nation to move us forward, seeing each other, humanity, shared humanity. That's my thing. And so this book is going to be good in helping me do that. Thank you.
Thank you, and that on that note, we will end our panel. Again, I'm very moved, and now I'm very happy and grateful to have gotten to spend this time with you, and you guys too. Thank you very much.